what does healing mean to me? So healing implies there's something to heal from. And for most of us, that's some kind of trauma, usually caused by people. And I'll give an overview first, and then I'll kind of dive into the steps I've taken. So the first step of healing is to acknowledge the trauma, which is to say, all the things that were done to us that inside some part of us was screaming, and we may not have been able to scream out loud because that would make it worse, that this isn't right. There's no reason a human being, or me in particular, should be treated this way. We just have this innate knowing that, no, this is shit and shouldn't go on, and what the fuck. And when we do that, there's a part of us that has to answer, well, why? Why me in particular? And is there anything I can do to lessen it? Or, to go to the other extreme, is there anything I can do to ultimately be loved? So part of healing for me has been to acknowledge the traumas that occurred, which for me were mostly physical, but more recently I discovered more overtly sexual than I thought they had been. And to acknowledge or feel the emotions connected with that. So one of those emotions for me has been anger. In my case, well, there was physical hitting. And it's not just the emotions, though. It's also the after effects, the adaptations, if you will. So I'll give a few examples here. I'm going to the gym every day now because one of my intentions is to really get my body in excellent physical health. And I've kind of had a lifelong challenge with being in a body, if you will. Like I've always felt either a certain level of discomfort and or pain. If you were to, like out of 10, I'd say a 2 or 3 for almost my entire life. And I have tried everything to address it, everything medical, all kinds of energetic techniques. I mean, man, you name it, I've tried it. And some things have helped, but there's been a persistency to it, which, I always connect anything going on in my life that I would consider not ideal to something from the past that's not resolved. So I realized, and there's been I'd say a small background of anger that's come more to the surface recently. And I don't direct the anger at people. I never direct it at my wife, Lynetta, or anybody else. But it comes out when, like, let's say I'm working on a project, like trying to fix something in my RV, and I'm trying to get some little screw in a corner, and it keeps squirting off the screwdriver and flying off when I'm working on it. And man, after a few tries, if it doesn't want to go into that corner, I'll just start getting pissy and cursing, and I'll really let loose. Or if I'm working on the computer, and I've been a computer consultant for like 40 years, so I'm pretty much a master, and something's not doing what it should do, and I know it could be better designed, then I'll also start getting really pissy and cursing at the computer. So, and Lynn and I have talked about this a lot over the past few years, and it's always been a question in my mind, like, so what's behind this anger? And I've always known somehow it relates to my dad, but recently, just in the past couple, yeah, even the last week or so, had a major breakthrough. Um, Lynetta sometimes uses chat to help us either for our own selves or when we're coaching people. And she came up with a statement um, that was just so nailed me. And the statement was, "Nobody tells me what to do," which is exactly against my dad because he was always telling me what to do. And if I spoke up, I mostly get slapped or not get what I want. So nobody tells me what to do, even myself. And when I heard that part, I was like, oh, fuck, that totally nails me. Because it's like, I've known what to do, um, like health wise, like we eat very healthy. Yeah, I have a little bit of a sweet tooth, but right now I've probably got at least 20, 25 pounds of excess weight. And my body does not like excess weight. It's causing all kinds of problems, even though it's not a huge amount. And I know, well, gee, all I have to do is eat less. I mean, I am exercising. But there's been a part of me that's just been resistant to eating less. And when she came up with a statement, nobody's going to tell me what to do, even me, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely fighting against myself, even with the food issue. So that was kind of like a big revelation a few weeks ago. And then the past week, we were digging in some more. I just want to say, it is so awesome to have an aligned partner who you're both like working on yourself. So there's no finger pointing. When something comes up and, triggers come up, if you've got any trauma in your past, there's no way to avoid that. But we never point the finger at each other and say, well, you made me feel like none of that. It's like, okay, I'm triggered and I recognize it's something from my past that's causing the trigger. And then what we do is we actually team up on the same side. So we're both working on my trigger or both working on her trigger. It's really awesome. So there's none of this going on. It's like, okay, how do we solve what's going on with you or me? So and we've done this, we're going on 12th year now of marriage, and phenomenal to have that support. In fact, we even, say to ourselves, like, I don't know how anybody could do this on their own without that constant support. So actually, to partly answer the question, what is healing? It's like, get all the help you need. And if you can have a partner that does it, man, does that speed the process? Like, if you're just working with a therapist once a week or twice a week, compared to a partner that, in the middle of the night, you can say, hey, I'm struggling over something. Can we, are you awake enough to process with me? And they'll say, yeah, like we have a commitment 24/7. One of us needs something, we're there. So, so we were doing some processing further about, the whole anger issue that I had, and actually got to the fact that I didn't fully have my no, my ability to say, no, I don't want to do that, because I couldn't at home. But I got, even to myself, I was not allowing myself to have a no. So going back to these projects where I'd get all pissy if something wasn't working right, I realized I didn't have a no that I could say, no, if it's not working easily, you don't have to do it. Instead, I was like, no, you're the handyman and the computer guy. It's like, you need to figure this out. And then when it's not, then I would go, all pissy on myself. So, I finally was like, oh, you mean I could say no to anything? Even the stuff like I've made myself do, or it's in my wheelhouse. I really am good at these things, but I could still say no if it's just not going the way I want. And I was in this state of like, whoa, like that is amazing. Like I almost felt for several, and it was literally just like last week, like all of a sudden I was like floating in space, like this old identity I had been released, and I'm just like floating up here like, wow, I can say no to anything. And I wasn't going, the flip side of that is when you can say no fully, then you can decide what you want to say yes to in life. But I was purposely not even going there, like, because that would be like, let's just be in the space of no for a while before I even start trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do? How do I want to direct myself? So that was huge. And that was literally like last week. So part of healing is to acknowledge what happened openly, acknowledge the emotions of it. And I did a lot of that more in the past. There was, I was married for 21 years, and then there were certain things that were not working in the relationship. She was actually a hoarder, the kind you see on the TV shows, like filled the house, yay high with shit. And wasn't taking responsibility for her life, blaming me for everything she was unhappy about. And finally, after 21 years, I was like, hun, we're done. Like, no more. And then I had a girlfriend for about a year and a half who looked totally different, but I realized had some of the same patterns. And when that relationship started going downhill, because again, there was not taking responsibility, I realized, wow, even though this person looked totally different, it was the same pattern, and like, I need a little help. So I had a good friend who we did like gestalt for like a month and a half, like literally every day. I'm trying to remember, we even did it twice a day. And man, I would have these gut wrenching feelings that was like, oh my, like I could hardly believe I could survive it for almost like 4, 5, 6 weeks every day. It was the most intense work I ever did, and she did some child work, like reparenting the child and also reparenting the teen. And that was phenomenal as far as helping me emotionally tap into a lot of the stuff that had to do with my past. Another part to the healing, though, well, also is to recognize the patterns that it's affected my life. Like I've already shared, like this anger that would come out in some of these ways. So that was another part of healing. It's just like the awareness of the different ways that this has affected me emotionally, life patterns. One of the biggest helps to me, though, was spiritually to get a context for all the stuff that, quote, happened to me. You have to at some point answer the question, why me? And because most of us go like, there either is something wrong with me, why this is happening, or I'm doing something wrong and I better learn the right thing to do. It's, I think, usually one of those two. So I started searching spiritually to get answers, not just to that, but literally to understand all of life. I had this question, it basically comes down to the, who are we? Why are we here? What's it all about? Why is there, quote, suffering in the world? All the big questions. And I started studying. I was raised nominally Jewish, but my family wasn't really into it. And I decided to study more intensely after college. Um, but partly what piqued my interest was sometime around college, I read part of a book from Dr. Raymond Moody, who was a surgeon who would operate on people who had life-threatening, like heart attacks. I don't remember exactly what his specialty was. But often after surgery, people would come back and would say, oh, I had this amazing experience when I temporarily died in my heart attack or whatever. And they would relay things to him that he was like, I don't know what any of this is. And after hearing enough of these stories, he started investigating and eventually wrote this book, Life After Life, which talked about what's beyond just the physical now, especially when we temporarily die. And eventually there was a whole genre of literature created called near-death experiences. So I actually kind of along the way started really avidly studying this because I kind of sensed like this might give us hints at kind of what the whole thing is about. But I also decided to look in my own religion, see what answers they had. So I actually started studying intently, mostly in Hebrew, ended up studying for 8 years, got ordained as a rabbi, but found I had some wonderful experiences, and I did end up deciding to live as a religious Jew for about 30 years. But I didn't find that I really got most of the answers I was looking for. There were, Hasidic stories that gave me some hints and, some teachings, but it's like no sense of the big picture. And there were some really troubling things in religion, particularly the whole Western idea of God who's scorekeeping, counting sins, just waiting to punish you, if you do the wrong move. And yeah, Judaism had its solutions like Yom Kippur and, giving charity and all these things. But it never really dealt with the issue of who that God is, who's supposedly the creator of everything. And it was kind of a sucky foundation to base an amazing life off of, to be in fear of God who created everything. And I also, as I studied, realized that, Christianity and Islam didn't do any better because they still kept that same God. They just came up with their own solutions to the problem of appeasing that God. So even though I started living a religious life, I was still searching for a better way to understand the whole worldview. So I started studying the near-death experiences, and that gave me some understanding. And probably one of the biggest things is some people, when they temporarily died, like in a car accident, a heart attack, whatever, would have an experience where they would leave their body. And, there's a lot of stories, like they're even like looking down on their body and they see like paramedics working on it, whatever. And some of them would, like, if you want to say it, leave the earth plane. And they would meet some kind of spiritual being. Some people would call them angels or spirit guides. It could be somebody who died who they knew. And with that person, they might review some of the highlights of their life so far. And what was interesting is they were mostly shown how they interacted with other people. And when they did that, they would see not just what they did, like what happened, but how it affected the other person. So for example, let's say you're at work and a colleague comes to you and needs some help with something and you're in a bad mood and you say, no, you know what, you should be able to do this on your own. I'm too busy to help you. Like, go figure it out. And you're kind of brusque and sharp with them. So they might like see that incident in this, life review in the near-death experience. But not only would they see what they did, they actually felt what the person they said it to felt, as if they were them, Yeah. So they felt like, oh my God. Oh, like they felt what it felt like to be kind of attacked or brushed off. And then not only that, then they might see that that person went home and he was angry still. And, when he got home, he like kicked the dog and yelled at his wife, and his son wanted some help in the homework. And he was like, I'm too busy. Don't bother me. So he saw like the ripple effect, kind of like throwing the stone into the pond, of how that one action of being brusque at work kind of like just affected and rippled out. Conversely, let's say they were kind to somebody. Not only would they see themselves like speak kindly or do something nice, but they might feel the relief that person felt when they gave them some attention, some love. And then you might see that that person went home and like petted the dog and cooked dinner, helped, the daughter with the homework, and all the ripple effects also. And the interesting thing from most of the near-death literature was like, there was no judgment. There was no being there waiting to say, okay, you've got 217 sins, you're in trouble, buddy. There was none of that. It was instead just an awareness of how their life had affected others that they weren't aware of till then. And then when they're revived and they come back to their life and they're like, oh my God, I never realized how my actions were affecting others. Most people come back are just so much kinder and more sensitive. And they may change careers and go into the healing arts so that like really impressed me. And it also started to challenge my religious notions like, oh, the whole judging God doesn't seem to be there in the near-death literature. So that was kind of like look at that. So I kept studying, and then I came across literature about past lives. And that was kind of like another step in my spiritual growth that ultimately connects back to the whole issue of healing. And, I'm kind of a skeptic. I have a biology background, so at heart, I'm a scientist, and I really do love science, but I'm also totally open to the woo-woo, and some people would say, the woo-woo stuff is just science not yet explained. And I probably do believe that. So there was a therapist in Miami, Brian Weiss, is still alive. And he helped people. He had like a psychology or psychiatry practice, and he helped people specifically with phobias. And he would often use a regression technique where under hypnosis, he would take people back to maybe a childhood event that they had forgotten, use some desensitizing techniques, and then when they came back to the present, whatever phobia, fear they had would often go away by, recalling that past event under hypnosis and desensitizing them. So one day he gets a woman who has a fear of water, and he does several sessions with her, and she does recall some stuff from childhood, but nothing that he does helps her get rid of the fear of water in the present. And finally, he's just about ready to refer her out because he feels he can't do anything else. He decides to give it one last attempt. And under hypnosis, he gives a command and he says, go back to the time when this fear of water first originated. And then he starts asking open-ended questions. You don't want to lead somebody under hypnosis. And he says, like, what's going on? What do you see? And she starts describing something that she could not have experienced. She basically starts describing that she's a little girl, and she describes clothing from, 100, 150 years ago. And she says she's getting off a wooden ship onto a dock. And as she's walking off the gangplank, she falls into the water and almost drowns. And last moment, they like pull her out of the water. And everything she describes about the scene could not possibly be coming from her current life. She's like a suburban housewife in this lifetime. So Dr. Weiss is listening to all this and he doesn't know what to do with it. In fact, to himself, he's kind of saying, like, is this woman having a psychotic break? He had no idea. So, but he decides, okay, fine, whatever's going on. He still uses his desensitizing techniques under hypnosis and brings her back. And then within a couple weeks, her phobia was gone. And he really didn't know what to do with it, but he just kind of filed it away in the category of, I have no idea what that was. So a few months later, he gets a man who's got a phobia. I don't recall what it was. And again, does some regression techniques, but the phobia doesn't go away. He finally gives a similar command, go back to the time when it first originated. And this man starts describing a life, again, he could not have lived. And again, Brian Weiss is internally saying, I don't know about this, but he does the same desensitization techniques and takes the man back out of hypnosis. And within a couple of weeks, the phobia was gone. So he starts saying to himself, is it possible that people under hypnosis can really remember past lives? Like, is it really possibly true as opposed to something made up? So he starts studying, and eventually he came to believe that people really were remembering. And he created what became known as past life regression. And he's famous for, like, training a lot of people with that technique. And that was kind of like the second door to me to the spiritual world, because that like really made it real. It started giving me more of the big picture of what life is all about. And I was so interested in it that I actually decided to do some past life regression sessions myself. So there was a woman I was doing some therapy with, and she also specialized in hypnosis. And we ended up doing 10, 15, 20 past life regression sessions. And again, as I said, I'm kind of a big skeptic. And one of my concerns was under hypnosis, am I going to be making things up in my mind? I was like, because I knew my mind could like throw things out, and it's like, I need to know this is real. So we go under hypnosis, and she does this procedure to like have me go back in time. And generally she'd say, go back to a time that's useful to you. I don't remember the exact instructions. And then she starts asking open-ended questions like, what year is it? And I'm like, 1859. And the moment the words came out of my mouth, I was like, wait, who said that? Like, how do I know that? Like, I knew I wasn't thinking in my brain, like, what year should I say? It literally popped out of me. And I almost felt like I was a spectator to what came out of me. So I knew like, oh, this is not me making something up. And then she said like, and where are you? And I was like, Australia. And I was like, how do I know this is Australia? So that was like, oh, okay, I'm not making this up. So we did a bunch of sessions, and one of the most interesting is if, past lives work for you, does for me. One of the things that happens is we often incarnate in lives with people that we're familiar with from this life. We have what we might call as a soul group or soul friends, and we often incarnate with them in multiple lives. So she would ask just open-endedly, like in some of the lifetimes I saw, do you recognize anybody? So there were 2 lifetimes where my dad from this lifetime was present. And in one of those lifetimes, he was a man and I was a woman. A soul doesn't have a sex. So we may, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, So we may reincarnate as a man or as a woman, and in this country or that country, and this religion and that religion, and like there's really no attachments to how we need to incarnate and all those particulars. So in this lifetime, he was a man, I was a woman. Apparently, I was his lover, and I was not faithful to him. And he got angry and killed me. And I was like, okay. And then there was another lifetime. This was probably in the American South. I was definitely black. I was a slave. That was clear. And I had a wife and I think a son. And he was actually like the plantation owner. And at some point I just decided I had it, and I decided to run away. And I was like running through a forest, and he caught up to me. And next to a stream, or in a stream, he actually, like, I guess, drowned me. Because I remember like looking up from underwater. I'm like looking up and I'm like, oh, I must be dead because I'm underwater looking up. And that was like a second lifetime with my dad. And when I got that, you think, well, that's terrible. Like he killed you in 2 lifetimes. But actually, I was kind of like, wow. Now, my dad died like 30 years ago when I was in my early 30s. And he could be violent at home, and it was mostly towards us kids. I was the oldest and the only son, and I had 2 younger daughters. Not like severe beatings, but when he got angry, he'd really start, hitting you, and he'd even take his belt off and do that. And there was once when I was a teen, and for the first time ever, he started to hit my mom. And I guess I was big enough or old enough that I literally went up and like positioned myself in front of him, like, stop. And we came like this close to each other, and then he backed down. And man, I was like shaking after that. I went to my room and like, the energy of that. And when I did the past life sessions and saw that he had killed me in 2 lives, I was like, wow, this lifetime was a resounding success because I didn't get killed. I was like, hallelujah. So it's a funny perspective, but it actually helped me to see that, it hadn't gotten as bad as it had in previous lifetimes. So that was past lifetimes. So that gave me some help with the healing. Now, as I'm living this religious life in South Florida in a community, I kept like studying on the side to kind of still look for answers to my questions. Now, the biggest and best answers I've gotten to date were from another scientist. His name was Dr. Michael Newton. He was a therapist, practiced mostly in Northern California and Oregon. And he also did hypnosis to help people who came to him. But he would do longer sessions than Brian Weiss. Like a past life regression session is typically an hour and a half, 2 hours. Michael Newton, he would do sessions that were like 3 to 4 hours and put people in deeper states of hypnosis. And what he found when he did that is people could remember not just past lives, but everything that happened from when they died in a previous lifetime, ascended to heaven, the soul realm, whatever you want to call it. Everything that goes on there with other souls and teachers and everything. And then all the choices that were made until reincarnation into the current lifetime. And he constructs this beautiful picture. Like, there's no judgment, there's no karma, nobody's forced to do anything. Like, a lot of things I had heard, like, it totally dispelled all those notions. Basically, everything is done at choice. You know, it's like we as souls, you know, yes, there is a creator who actually creates our souls, not even our bodies, but our souls. In fact, there's some chapters. He wrote 2 books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls. For me, those are the most powerful books I've ever read. You know, so literally talks about how our souls are created, one of the most bizarre things I've ever read. But then how we evolve as souls. So it's kind of like, just as like, you know, we go through kindergarten and 2nd grade and 5th grade and 10th grade and high school and maybe grad school and whatever. Our souls grow also mostly by incarnating here and experiencing things. And you might think, well, if it's really our free will, we would choose to just have, you know, beautiful experiences, all loving and hunky-dory and wealth and everything. But to grow, our souls purposely choose to have some difficult experiences. Not necessarily the huge traumatic things that go on, but some challenges nonetheless. And he what he does is he basically recorded all his, he calls this in-between life regression. He recorded all his sessions, and he would again ask open-ended questions. And he found out things like, you know, that we have these soul groups and often, you know, incarnate with them. He even has like a chapter in his book where he has a woman who came to him for in-between life regression, and she describes everybody in her family. You know, this is my sister, dad, grandma, cousin, uncle, blah, 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 all of them. And then he does some previous life regressions, and like in the 1800s, she describes most of the same souls, except they're different. Like her dad in that lifetime is her grandpa in that lifetime. Her sister in this lifetime was her aunt in that lifetime. And then in the 1700s, she describes a different configuration with the same souls. So it was like, wow, like, okay, so there's certain souls that we frequently incarnate with. And I was like, yeah, obviously I've done that with my dad, and it's kind of been a bitch at times, but okay. But one of the things that's described is to grow as souls, we basically want experiences. And to a soul, quote, good experiences are no better than bad experiences. Now, when we're here on the earth plane and, you know, somebody's beating the crap out of us, that sucks. You know, no qualms. Like that, there's real pain and there's real suffering. Like, yeah, it's all true. But a soul may want to experience that. And not only that, but to be on both sides of a certain kind of human dynamic. So, for example, he talks about somebody might be a thief in a lifetime, let's say in the past. And then, you know, when they come back and they get like how their thievery impacted everybody and all that, they might decide, you know what, next lifetime, I want to feel what it feels like to have people steal from me. So they might, in this lifetime, have a business and all their employees end up being dishonest. And it's not that it's, quote, happening to them. They're just a victim of it. But they may actually have desired to have that experience and even enlisted other souls to agree to do some of these nasty things. Now, I'm not saying that's an explanation for all the horrible things that go on, but there may be some element of that in some of the traumas that happen to us. So that gave me another context to help me on my own personal healing journey, to understand like, oh, so there's no punishing God. There's no karma, like we get payback if we're bad in a past lifetime, then we're made to suffer. It's like, no, none of that. It's more like we may choose to experience the flip side of something because we want to experience it. Now, what really helped me the most spiritually with my healing with my dad was we have a good friend in Eugene, Oregon, who's a theta healer. Theta healers, one of the things they can do is they can see past lives. And sometimes when we incarnate here and we meet somebody who we've had a relationship in a past life, there may be some of those old feelings that come up. And that might actually be the explanation for like why you meet somebody and you have an immediate dislike. You can't even explain why. It's like, oh, God, don't like that person. Or don't trust him. And you don't even know anything about him. It's like, don't trust that guy. Or you meet somebody and it's like, whoa, why am I attracted to this person? Like, I hardly know them, but man, I feel like something's drawing me towards them. And that could be because they're previous soulmates and you may have some, either unresolved stuff or remembrance of some wonderful stuff that you shared. So one time, my wife Lynetta and I and Kathleen and one other friend were sitting in her healing room in her house, and Kathleen starts describing past lives that the four of us had shared together. So apparently we're members of the same soul group, and we've incarnated in many lives. And she just starts describing some of these lives. So one of them, for example, the four of us were all men, and we were something like Knights Templar. And, we're supposed to like defend the people and do good and all that. And we did that for a while. But somebody apparently paid me off in that lifetime to betray the others. And I took the money, and they were all captured or killed. So that was one lifetime. Another lifetime, I was a man. The three of them were women. And I captured the three of them, or took them prisoner, or whatever, and basically made the three of them to be my sex slaves. Third lifetime, Kathleen said I was something like some kind of wizard, like I could really do kind of magical things, and I actually had a school where I would teach people. And in that lifetime, the three of them were women again, and they came to my school to study, and I did teach them, but I also secretly hypnotized them, got them all pregnant, and they never knew it was me. Now, she shared about 6 lives. And if you're hearing a common theme there, basically in all of them, I was the bad guy. And it wasn't like I was like, oh no, I couldn't have done that. There was a part of me that was like, yeah, I could see how I could do that. There were certain tendencies I had earlier in my life to kind of like, I would say want to use people, but, I really wasn't close to people earlier in my life. So wasn't shocked when she shared all this. But here's where the deepest healing came in for me. When I saw or heard from her, I didn't actually see these lifetimes, but she saw them, and I trust her. When I heard about all these lifetimes, where basically I had used people for my personal gain, whether it was money or power or sex, it's usually one of the big 3. I then finally got a context for my experiences with my dad that was really soul satisfying. Because in this lifetime, my dad had treated me exactly like an object. It was like his word was law. If you objected, you'd probably get hit. And it was almost like the classic, like, a child is an appendage of the parent and should do whatever the parent says. And I hated it. There was almost none of my free will considered. And always felt I was either being controlled or manipulated. And there was a part of me that was just furious, especially in my teen years, I remember. It really hit strongly about being used by my dad. So when our friend shared that I had been the exact kind of person like my dad in past lives, and then I took, Michael Newton's works, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, and mapped how we want to be on both sides of a certain human interaction, like using people and being used by people. In other words, being the aggressors and being the victims. Like, for the soul, we want to experience both sides of these dynamics. And then I really got into my soul, so to speak, like how perfect a choice it was for me to choose my dad to, quote, victimize me. Not saying it wasn't hard, it was. Because I really got it in my kishkas, in my insides, how anathema it is to use somebody by being on the receiving side of that. In fact, and I'm like convinced at this point, like whatever future incarnations I have, there's no way I'm going to use people like that anymore. So this was kind of like the spiritual understanding of healing for me, to understand that all this trauma and pain and all the stuff that goes on in the world, it's not just accidental. We're not just victims of it. I mean, there may be some of that, but to some extent, there's an intentionality of our souls in wanting to experience this for us to grow as souls. And that kind of like really helped cement for me, a way to deal with trauma and healing. So so my personal path, and both my wife Lynette and I, we help people with healing. So we kind of use all these different levels or layers or techniques. So we deal with it on the physical level, like sometimes there's physical stuff in the body that just needs to be released. So for example, there were times earlier in our marriage that sometimes Lynetta would just start to shake. It's kind of like an animal that's been traumatized, like almost died, will sometimes just start shaking with just, all the energy, the emotion, the hormones of what just happened. And she would just lie in bed and she would just shake. And I would it's called holding space, just be next to her, wouldn't even necessarily touch her because she could literally be flailing her arms. Sometimes I put my hands up just to make sure she didn't slap me in the face. But just being present for this physical level of healing. And one of the other ways I help, and then also there are times, and we've done it for each other, that I'll just hold her, and she likes to be held really tight, and just let her feel what it feels like to have a loving, supportive male, because some of her trauma came from her dad, who's not trying to use her or hurt her. And in fact, one of the things I'm just about to do is start to offer professional cuddling, because I get some people just physically need to be held. and just feel what it can be like to be with a human being that's not dangerous, and actually how amazingly awesome it can feel to just be safe and loved and honored in the physical presence of another human being. So one level is to work on the physical, another's to work on the emotional level, to acknowledge the emotions, feel them. We have a whole bunch of techniques we use to release the emotions. Then we also deal with the limiting beliefs that, like when something happens as a child and we're trying to figure out why it's happening to me, we might say, oh, well, that's just because all people are assholes, you know, or the world is all about suffering or whatever. And it's like, so a lot of times, and this is kind of like my specialty, I love to feel around for limiting beliefs, whether it's my own or somebody we're coaching, to like, oh, what do you say about yourself, the world, God, people, power, love, and really like feel into exactly how they've constructed their world in adaptation to what's gone on. So we've done this for ourselves, we do this for other people. But then for me, probably the ultimate level is to go to what we now call the soul view, is to get that broadest context for everything that's happened and to understand, oh, I'm not necessarily a victim of this, but I may have desired this. And then it's like, it's almost like it gives a foundation for all these other techniques to work, because then it's like, oh, all right, fine. I may have called it in, so to speak. And as horrific as it is, okay, I can release it and then use all these different techniques for releasing it, knowing that it's not just a random, victimization that should never have happened. And there it is. Yeah, that's kind of how I see healing and do healing, both for myself, for my wife Lynetta, and for other people that we work with as well. Thank you for receiving all that.